Two survival stories centuries apart with almost nothing in common on the surface. One is a wooden vessel the size of a small ship, carrying 8 people and thousands of animals through a flood that erases the entire world. The other is a small basket of reeds, carrying one crying infant a few hundred yards down a river, past a handful of reeds, into the hands of a princess. Different scale, different century, different everything, except the word. In the original Hebrew, both of them, the ship the size of a small ship and the basket you could carry under one arm, are called by the exact same rare word, Tevah. It appears in only these 2 stories in the entire Torah, and nowhere else. Not once. Tonight, I want to show you exactly where that word sits on the page, what else these 2 stories quietly share once you go looking, and where I think the honest line is between fascinating literary echo and reading too much into a coincidence. Let's start with the word itself, because almost every English Bible hides what's actually happening here. In Genesis 6:14, God tells Noah, "Make thee an ark of gopher wood." In Exodus 2:3, Moses' mother took for him an ark of bulrushes. 2 different English translations, ark both times, and that's actually accurate to the King James choice, but it means an English reader has no way of noticing anything unusual, because ark sounds like a completely ordinary word for boat or box. It isn't. In Hebrew, the word underneath both verses is Tevah, Tebah. And Tevah is not the ordinary Hebrew word for boat. That word exists, onia, used elsewhere in the Old Testament for ordinary ships, like Jonah's ship in Jonah chapter 1. Tevah is different, rarer, and it shows up in exactly 2 stories in the whole Torah: Noah's vessel and the basket on the Nile. Nowhere else. And here's a detail that surprises almost everyone the first time they hear it. Even the Ark of the Covenant, the golden chest carrying the tablets of the law, the most famous ark in the whole Bible, is not a Tevah. It's called Aaron, a completely different Hebrew word used for chests and coffins throughout the Old Testament. So when English translations call 3 completely different objects ark, Noah's vessel, Moses' basket, and the Golden Covenant box, they're actually flattening 2 distinct Hebrew words into one English one. And in doing so, they erase the one connection that's actually there. Not the Covenant Ark, but a genuine, exclusive 2-story-only word shared between a global flood and a runaway basket. That's not folklore, and it's not a stretch. It's sitting in the Hebrew lexicon, plainly documented. What it means is the question worth actually sitting with. Start with the vessel we all picture first. Genesis 6:14 through 16 gives you exact specifications. Gopher wood, rooms within, and this detail specifically. Pitch it within and without with pitch. Sealed, inside and out, against the water that's coming. The Tevah's job in this story isn't to sail anywhere. Noah is never given oars, a rudder, or a destination, because the vessel isn't a ship in the sense of something steered toward a place. It's a sealed container, entrusted entirely to what the water does to it, carrying exactly what needs to survive a catastrophe that's about to erase everything outside its walls. 8 people. Every kind of land animal, according to the text, 2 by 2, 7 by 7 of the clean ones. And when the waters finally recede, Genesis 8:1 gives you the line the whole story turns on. And God remembered Noah, not steered to safety by human skill. Remembered and preserved inside a sealed box built exactly to specification, and then left entirely at the mercy of a flood no human hand could control. That's the shape of the word Tevah in its first appearance. A sealed vessel of survival, built by human hands but powerless without divine intervention, carrying the future of an entire species through a judgment that destroys everyone left outside it. Now the second appearance, and I want you to notice how precisely the shape repeats, just at a completely different scale. Exodus chapter 1 ends with Pharaoh's decree. Every Hebrew baby boy is to be thrown into the Nile. Exodus 2.2 and 3 pick up from there. Moses' mother hides him 3 months, and when she could not longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, a tevah woven from papyrus reeds instead of gopher wood, small enough to carry in her arms instead of large enough to carry a species. She places the child inside it and sets it in the flags by the river's brink, deliberately into the very water Pharaoh had ordered, used as a weapon against children exactly like him. Look at what's actually happening in the shape of the story. A vessel is built by a human hand, entrusted to water that is actively part of a death sentence, carrying inside it the one life meant to be preserved through exactly the danger threatening everyone outside the vessel. Pharaoh's decree functions, structurally, almost like a smaller, more targeted flood, a ruler using water to erase a generation, the same way Genesis describes water erasing a corrupted world. And once again, the Tevah is what stands between the water and the one who's meant to survive it. Same word, same basic shape, a very different flood. Here's the detail that for me is the hardest one to wave off as coincidence, because it isn't just the word, it's the specific material. Genesis 6:14 says Noah's Tevah was to be pitched within and without with pitch. Exodus 2:3 says Moses' mother daubed it with slime and with pitch. Pitch, the same waterproofing substance named explicitly in both verses, in both stories, doing the exact same job, sealing a vessel that's about to be trusted entirely to water it cannot be steered through. If this were only the word Tevah showing up twice, you could reasonably call it a case of the Hebrew language simply running out of better options. 2 authors, centuries apart, reaching for the closest available term for container that floats. But the pitch is a separate, specific physical detail, repeated in both accounts, doing the same waterproofing work in both stories. 2 rare pieces of vocabulary lining up in the same order around the same kind of vessel, doing the same kind of job, is a much harder thing to write off as chance. Either 2 independent authors happen to reach for the identical rare word and the identical sealant, or someone, the author of Exodus, working with Genesis already in front of them, or a later editor shaping both texts side by side, built this echo on purpose. Step back now and look at the whole shape of both stories side by side, because the echo isn't only vocabulary, it's structure. In Genesis, corruption fills the whole earth. God sends judgment by water, and one family, sealed inside a tevah, survives to become the seed of a new humanity. In Exodus, corruption fills Pharaoh's court. Judgment by water is aimed at a generation of children, and one child, sealed inside a tevah, survives to become the one who leads an entire people out of slavery. Both stories end with their survivor stepping onto dry ground to begin something the old world couldn't have produced. Noah steps out to a refounded humanity and a new covenant. Moses is drawn out of the water. His very name in Exodus 2:10 is explained by Pharaoh's own daughter as meaning drawn out, because I drew him out of the water, and grows up to draw an entire nation out of slavery through water himself, at the Red Sea, decades later. I think that's the real payoff of tracing this one word all the way through. It's not just that Genesis and Exodus share a rare noun, it's that both of Israel's foundational deliverance stories are built around the same core image, a sealed vessel entrusted to dangerous water, preserving exactly what needs to survive so that something entirely new can begin on the other side. Now here's where I want to slow down and be honest about the edges of this, because it's easy to get carried away with a pattern this satisfying. What I can tell you with confidence, Tevah is a real, rare, documented Hebrew word used in exactly these two contexts in the Torah and nowhere else, and pitch is used explicitly as a sealant in both. That's not speculation. It's in the text, checkable in any Hebrew concordance. What I can't tell you with the same confidence is why. Maybe the author of Exodus knew Genesis intimately and chose the word Tevah specifically to signal this is another Noah story, told smaller, building a deliberate echo for readers sharp enough to catch it, the same way the Aram and Aramim wordplay in Genesis 2 and 3 rewards a careful reader with a pun most people miss entirely. Or maybe Tevah was simply the standard Hebrew word for a small sealed vessel built to float, and it shows up in exactly these two stories only because these are the only two stories in the Torah that happen to need a word like that. No hidden intention required, just two authors reaching for the one available noun that fit. I lean toward the first reading because the shared pitch detail feels too specific to be accidental. But I want to be honest that I lean toward is exactly what this is, an interpretation, not a proof. And any serious documentary on this topic that tells you otherwise is selling you more certainty than a two-word vocabulary study can actually deliver. Whatever you decide about intention, though, I think the pattern itself is worth sitting with, because it doesn't actually stop with these two stories. Follow the water forward. Moses, drawn out of the Nile as an infant, later stretches his hand over the Red Sea and draws an entire enslaved nation out through parted water onto dry ground, the same water into dry ground shape that closes both the flood and the Exodus. Later still, the prophets picture Israel's future restoration in flood and new creation language echoing Noah directly, and the New Testament writers, centuries after that, will describe baptism itself, going down into water and coming up alive on the other side, using flood imagery explicitly in a reading of Noah's story that is a later theological interpretation layered onto the text, not something Genesis itself claims to predict. Whether every one of those later readings was intended by the original authors or not, the core shape is hard to miss once you've traced it from a wooden vessel of gopher wood to a small basket of reeds. In this tradition, water is never only destruction. It's the thing survival has to pass through. So, Noah's Tevah and Moses' Tevah. One word, two vessels, two floods, two beginnings. I've shown you exactly what's provable and exactly where I think honest certainty runs out. What you do with the rest of it is genuinely yours to decide. Did you know that word connection before tonight, or is this the first time you've seen Tevah written out plainly like this? Tell me in the comments, and tell me honestly whether you think this is deliberate design or coincidence, because I'm genuinely curious where this audience lands. If this changed how you'll read Exodus chapter 2 the next time you open it, share it with someone who loves the Moses story and has never once heard the word Tevah. And subscribe. There's a lot more hiding in plain sight in this text than most translations ever let you see. Until next time, read your Bible, but read the Hebrew underneath it when you can. Sometimes the real story is one word wide.